Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 212. Get over there and check the stove because I've got a pot filled with Gen X nostalgia that's overflowing and making a mess. This week's show is going to kick off with part 5 of the Blink and You'll Miss It retro segment as we look at more TV shows that came and went in a blink of an eye. We're going to go way back in the day, 20 years, and I'm going to share some memories of my brief time that I moved to southern Florida. A lot of fun stories there. There's going to be a brand new top 5 as we look at the top 5 worst giant monster movies. And there's going to be a brand new This Week in History and time capsule as we look back at the creation and the brief run of the Billboard magazine video games charts. All of that is coming up right now on episode 212 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Yes, get over to the stove and clean up the mess with the overflowing nostalgia. Use some Formula 409, Ajax, whatever else. Welcome into the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for making my show a part of your week as I scour the depths of the internet and the far back rooms of my mind to find some nostalgia I think you'll enjoy. There is going to be a lot to get into this week, a lot of fun content. So we're going to get into that really quickly. But of course, before I start, I can't do this proper without thanking my Patreon subscribers, my biggest supporters, Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, and Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. Thank you all so much for being the biggest supporters, putting your money where your mouth is in my never-ending quest to be a full-time content creator, whether it's podcasts, blogs, books, whatever my burgeoning film career is. You too can become a Patreon subscriber for $5 a month. The link is in the podcast notes if you want to go check out my page. I have an ever-growing free tier, including something I'm going to be adding soon, but we'll mention that later in the podcast. But we'll dispense with the pleasantries because I've got so much to get to, especially that Florida segment coming up later. So let us crack open this episode of the podcast and look at Blink and You'll Miss It Retro Part 5 as we look at more TV shows that came and went in a flash. Oh, here it is, folks. That well-loved segment where we take a look at things that came and went in a flash. It is Blink and You'll Miss It Retro. This is part 5, and man, I sound like I'm a game show host introducing a show that they're trying so desperately to make sound important. I feel like I should have said it was Tic-Tac-Doe. Although Blink and You'll Miss It Retro isn't that much more of an original idea. The funny thing is, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that when I was coming up with this idea of talking about things, shows, products, whatever, that came and went really quick, I used the sentence or the words Blink and You'll Miss It Retro as a placeholder for the top of the document where I started listing them. I don't think I had any intention of making that the actual name of the segment, but now it's too late. I'm 5 segments in. For those of you that are new here, Blink and You'll Miss It Retro, I give you a 6-pack of whatever topic we're going to speak about. Like I said, this week is TV shows that came and went in a flash. Luckily for me, there are quite a bit of these TV shows that bombed out. If you enjoyed this Blink and You'll Miss It Retro segment, there are 4 others in the archives. I'm thinking at some point this will be made into a mixtape. This is the exact kind of segment why I would do that. So I'm sure at some point in the not too distant future, there will be a mixtape that is all the Blink and You'll Miss It retro segments put into one. But enough of the setup. Let's crack open the first can of the 6-pack of retro. And the first show we're going to look at is one called Mego. Sounds like some early 90s robot toy, but nope, it's a TV show. Although to be fair, Mego was a sci-fi TV show. This show starred Bronson Pinchot, aka Balky from Perfect Strangers. It ran for a total of 6 episodes in 1997. The character of Mego is played by Bronson Pinchot. He's a 9,000-year-old shape-shifting alien from the planet Marmazon 4.0. It's like you've already lost me. So this alien crashes. He is discovered by 3 kids, brought home to their single dad, and it's the escapades of Mego trying to fit in, where he doesn't want to say where he's from, so he says he's from Canada instead. This show actually had 13 episodes created, which means 7 went unaired. What was interesting is that Mego, the show, was part of a deal that included $40 million to bring the heavy-hitting shows Step by Step and Family Matters to CBS. So they were allowed to create a new show, and it became Mego that bombed and was gone instantly. Next up is a show that was near and dear to my preteen heart, and that was Encyclopedia. The show was actually on HBO, and it was on for a total of 23 episodes from September 1988 through February 1989. The theme song right there, that was what I immediately thought of. Each episode featured a letter of the alphabet or a few letters of the alphabet, and there were sketches in the show to correspond with encyclopedia topics. 3 of the 6 writers for Encyclopedia actually had experience on Saturday Night Live, which makes it fascinating that the show flamed out so quickly. Now, granted, I guess Encyclopedia was meant for teens, preteens. It was HBO, but it was in conjunction with the Children's Television Workshop, Sesame Street. So I guess it would kind of handcuff the SNL writers that are used to writing for a more adult audience. The intro and closing theme was performed by the alt-pop rock band named Betty. They also did a bunch of songs for the individual sketches and such during the show. When looking for TV shows for these Blink and You'll Miss It retro segments, it's really hard for me to find ones that I remember because they would have been here and gone so fast. That's why I was glad that I stumbled upon Encyclopedia. It was sort of appointment viewing for me when I was 10, 11 years old. You can find episodes on YouTube if you're dying to watch Encyclopedia. I don't miss it that much. The next show I don't miss at all because I had never heard of it until I stumbled upon it in a commercial compilation, and that's a show called Amanda's.
Then B. Arthur's back, running a seaside hotel.
All I can see out of my window is trees. But what did you expect to see out of a window in California? Krakatoa erupting?
Amanda's right after Condo, Thursday, February.
This show was on ABC, and it was an American spin-off of the British show Fawlty Towers, which Fawlty Towers starred John Cleese of Monty Python fame. You can't fault ABC for trying. They had legendary star B. Arthur as the lead on the show. She starred as Amanda Cartwright, who had her motel, Amanda's by the Sea. Despite her recently being on the hit show Maude, this show did not work. It lasted for 13 episodes from February to May 1983. For the season, Amanda's was number 54 in the TV rating, so not awful, but definitely not the runaway hit that people were thinking with B. Arthur coming off of Maude. It was a bad sign when famed TV producer Norman Lear came to B. Arthur and said that you don't have anything, you're not playing a character, you're not playing anything. So if he didn't like it, it was pretty much a death knell. But don't worry for B. Arthur, because 2 years later, she was cast as Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls, and all was right in her world. The next show that came and went in a flash is one called Nick and Hillary's.
One thing's for sure, another things for certain. What can't be seen, nobody can tell. No.
This show is also known as Tattingers, and I'll tell you why in a second. This show was on for a total of 19 episodes, including 4 that went unaired. It was on from October 1988 to April 1989. It was originally known as Tattingers, with Nick and Hillary Tattinger, a divorced couple that run a Manhattan restaurant, until Nick was shot by a drug dealer, and so fearing it, they sold the restaurant and moved to Paris. This show started as a 1-hour pilot. It's a comedy drama, but obviously they had to cut it down. The show starred Stephen Collins and Blythe Danner as Nick and Hillary. It also had Jerry Stiller. It had a young Chris Elliott. And it also had a name change because of how bad the ratings were doing. It was the last-ditch effort to try to save Tattingers, was to change the name to just Nick and Hillary's. So, Tattingers had 11 episodes. It was canceled in January 1989, but they didn't want to give up, so they renamed it Nick and Hillary's, launched it again in April 1989, and it was canceled again after 2 episodes. Maybe they can reboot it with some of the other topics of the show and just call it, like, drug dealing restaurant. I don't know, that might not work. Let's continue Blink and You'll Miss It Retro with the 5th of the 6-pack I want to talk about, and it's a show called Ace Crawford Private Eye. This was a sitcom that aired on CBS for a whopping 1 month between March and April 1983. 5 total episodes. It starred Tim Conway. It was the parody of the quote-unquote hard-boiled detective trope. Each episode saw Ace Crawford get hired for a case, and he would go after the bad guys in his typical Tim Conway form, stuff that he was known for on the Carol Burnett show. But it just didn't translate, and audiences could not have cared less. I was alive back then. I was 5 years old. I was more interested in watching things like Knight Rider or Dukes of Hazzard. Maybe Ace Crawford just needed a talking car or a flying car. that would have gotten me to watch. I don't know if it would have helped with the ratings. And finally, we're going to wrap up the 6-pack of retro TV shows with a show called Harry. This show starred Alan Arkin and also Richard Lewis. It was on ABC in March 1987 and lasted a whopping 4 episodes. Info about this show is at a premium. I didn't find much. The description I found on IMDb says Harry Porshak is in charge at a major metropolitan hospital where the staff dabbles in various madcap activities. Ooh, there you go. Don't you wish you had watched Harry when it was out? Don't worry, nobody else wanted to watch it either. You can tell that a show didn't last long and no one cared about it when basically all I just gave you is all the info I can find on it. Number of episodes, 1 sentence about what the show was about. But there you go. Harry didn't last long. None of these shows lasted long. Blink and you will have missed them. Believe me, when I'm doing my research, finding products, toys, drinks, foods, TV shows, for these Blink and You'll Miss It retro segments, TV shows are the easiest ones to find. It's like every season there's half a dozen shows that get green-lighted and they go away in 3 or 4 episodes. It's really low-hanging fruit. So I hope you enjoyed this look back at shows that didn't last long. And we're going to follow it up with This Week in History with the Billboard magazine chart that did not last long either. This week in history, we are going back 43 years to September 14th, 1982, and the debut of the Billboard magazine Video Games Charts. This is another thing that I just happened to find out of pure luck. Billboard magazine, it's not really that big today anymore. I mean, no paper magazines really are. But for decades, Billboard had its music charts. That was kind of the thing everyone went by. The Hot 100, the top 200 albums. I mean, when I do the time capsule segment, like the one coming up in a few minutes, the way I judge the number one song of the time is the Billboard Hot 100. So it must have been confusing to people that read Billboard magazine for the music when suddenly in the summer of 1982, they debuted their video games charts. These kind of were a necessity. They were introduced at the peak of the arcade craze, and just as home consoles like the Atari 2600, Intellivision, and ColecoVision were exploding in popularity, so it does make sense. The video game charts were intended to track arcade game popularity, coin-op machines in arcades, bowling alleys, and bars, and also home video game cartridges. During this period, Billboard would run several categories of video game charts. Top arcade video games, which were basically ranked by the revenue made by the arcade cabinets. However many quarters we kids would put into them. In 1982, some of the titles that topped the charts of the arcade video games were Donkey Kong, Miss Pac-Man, Frogger, and Defender. There was also top home video games, so the cartridges, and this was simply ranked by retail sales of cartridges, and included the consoles that I had mentioned, Atari 2600, Intellivision, ColecoVision. The big hits of the time included Pitfall, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and E.T., the game that is seen as causing the video game crash of 1983. These charts, I think they were more a sign of the time because they didn't last long. And it ended because of the video game crash of 1983. Because by late 1983, retailers were flooded with unsold cartridges, arcades were declining, and Billboard naturally went back to its bread and butter that was music and film industry charts. You can go online and you can find examples of these charts. You just Google Billboard Video Games Chart 1982-83, maybe early 1984. Despite the video game charts not lasting long, mostly due to that video game industry crash, the charts are a fascinating early attempt by Billboard magazine to treat games like mainstream entertainment. They put them on par with music and film. They're actually one of the few records of arcade earnings and early console sales from the time. You could ask me what were the most popular arcade games when I used to go, and I'd give you my thoughts, but this was actually concrete data. Fun fact about the Billboard charts is that Miss Pac-Man was so popular in 1982 that it topped the chart in the arcade for months. It was similar to how you would get songs on the Hot 100 that would be there for 10, 12, 14 weeks. Miss Pac-Man was like Boyz II Men and Mariah Carey's One Sweet Day, except it was a round yellow blob with a mouth singing to her boyfriend that was also a round yellow blob with a mouth. And that very first Billboard Video Games chart debuted 43 years ago this week in history. We'll drop in another quarter because it is time to debut a brand new time capsule. For this one, we're going to stick to the same day, September 14th, 1982. The Billboard Video Games charts have debuted. What was going on in the world of pop culture back then? Well, let's find out. The number one song was Hard to Say I'm Sorry by Chicago. This was the lead single from the Chicago 16 album and spent 2 weeks at number one. This was Chicago's second number one song after If You Leave Me Now, which came out in 1976. Chicago is an all-time legendary band, but they've also had a legendary amount of turnover in the band. Peter Cetera sung this song, but in total, there have been at least 25 different members of the band Chicago since it formed in 1967. The number one movie was E.T., and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $2.94. Oh, easily one of the biggest movies of the 80s, about an alien that comes down to Earth. He needs help phoning home from his pal Elliot, played by Henry Thomas. It's got a young Drew Barrymore. The movie is 99% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't know who in the world are the idiots that voted this down. It's like the fools in the Baseball Hall of Fame voting that won't vote for a great player because they say, if Babe Ruth didn't get 100%, no one should. That's like that with E.T. E.T. made almost $800 million in 1982. It translates to more than $2.6 billion when adjusted for inflation to 2025. I know for a fact that my mother spent a lot of money going to see that movie with me and my sister Kate. She said she would bring us to the Yarmouth Drive-In because she could just drive the car in there and park it where we could watch the screen. And it was easier to get us to fall asleep watching E.T. I don't know how many times exactly she brought us to see it. I thought she said it was at least 5 or 6. It'd be like, E.T., tell me a bedtime story. Anyway, the number one TV show was 60 Minutes. This is a news show. It's been on for 57 seasons, first debuting in 1968. There have been tons of famous journalists as a part of this show, including Walter Cronkite, Charles Kuralt, Mike Wallace, Dan Rather, Diane Sawyer, and Andy Rooney. And if you were around back then, September 14th, 1982, perhaps you picked up the newest issue of Billboard magazine, you saw the top-selling games on the charts, you want those games, you want Donkey Kong. Well, first thing you got to do is you've got to get yourself a console. Well, you're in luck because you can get yourself a brand new Atari 2600 for $149.97, or about $500 when adjusted for inflation to 2025. Don't worry though, there are plenty of games on sale for you. Asteroids, Missile Command, Space Invaders, other super exciting titles like Video Checkers, Bowling, and Circus Atari. These games are all on sale for $24.88, or about $83 when adjusted for inflation. You could buy like 7 real checkerboards for the price of Video Checkers. So choose wisely. But that wraps up the time capsule. That wraps up This Week in History. Speaking of choosing wisely, I would recommend against watching any of these movies if you like giant monster movies, because these won't give you the thrills you're looking for unless you're looking to laugh. I have been a huge fan of monster movies, giant monster movies, ever since I can remember, especially Godzilla. Godzilla and the whole Godzilla universe, for the most part, I love. I could still watch any of those movies to this day. And I will freely admit, I do enjoy the B-side monsters, some of the offshoot monsters. This segment here, this top 5, we're going to look at the worst giant monster movies. At first, it was just going to be the worst giant monsters, but it made more sense to just talk about the movie in general and the monsters being part of it. Some of these are among the worst movies you could ever possibly see, which is why I say you should only watch these kind of ironically. Like, if you go into any of these movies thinking, oh, that podcast guy doesn't know what he's talking about, I'll see, you're going to be disappointed, unless you're on an edible or something. As with most of these top 5s, they are in no particular order, and I do have some honorable mentions of just worst giant monsters you could think of. So there's top 5 honorable mentions. I have seen all of these movies except one. And the one I haven't seen, it got on here just because its title is so stupid I can't stop laughing, but we'll get to that. Let's start with the honorable mentions for worst giant monster movies. They include Gorgo, which is a 1961 British movie, a giant lizard, basically a ripoff of Godzilla. Speaking of, another honorable mention is All Monsters Attack. This is a 1969 Toho Japanese monster movie, and it's got Godzilla in it, but it basically is centered around this little boy who gets bullied, and he befriends Godzilla's son, Manila. Oh, it is so awful. It is probably the worst Godzilla movie ever, except for the 1998 one, which I think I'm really bitter about because I spent my $10 to go see it in the theater. I should have just paid someone $10 to smack me in the face with a loaf of bread. Another honorable mention is the giant Gila monster. This is a 1959 movie about a giant lizard attacking teenagers in a town. This is on here mainly because it's like scenes with the lizard. It's just like it's crawling around on the ground, never anywhere near the people. So the effects are just so awful. It's like two different movies. Teenage drama and then nonstop footage of a lizard walking around. Another honorable mention is The Giant Claw. This is a 1957 American monster movie with this stupid-looking puppet buzzard giant bird. It looks like something you would have made in high school. So yes, the effects in this are just god-awful. And the last honorable mention is APE. Yes, there are periods after each letter. It is about a giant gorilla. It's from 1976. This movie is so bad because they wanted to have you mistake it for King Kong so badly that they put on the movie poster not to be confused with King Kong. So they've got the name on the poster even though it says not to be confused with, figuring that you might have a short attention span and just say King Kong and then go in and be wicked disappointed with a terrible looking monkey suit. Although it does give the middle finger at one point, which is pretty funny. So those are the honorable mentions for the worst giant monster movies. I have seen all of those. I have been disappointed by all of those. So get ready for the worst of the worst. Let's start the actual top 5 and get a drinking game going for all of my laughter as we start with number 1, Mansquito. It's like the worst title. I had to put it in just because of that. All I think of when I hear Mansquito is I think of the Seinfeld episode when Kramer and Frank Costanza go in for the bra for the man, and they call it the man's ear. Mansquito is from 2005, and if you couldn't tell from the title, it's about a man and a mosquito mixed DNA. It's like The Fly. This is a made-for-TV movie. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel, so maybe that explains why the special effects are just crap. Matt Jordan is the actor that plays the Mansquito character. He originally is a prisoner in jail for life, so he exchanges his life sentence to be part of these experiments, and he gets made into Mansquito. I don't know about how successful Mansquito was for Sci-Fi Channel, but I just know there were no sequels, although there is still time for a Mansquito versus Sharknado movie. Number 2 is Night of the Lepus. Lepus, aka Giant Killer Rabbits. This movie is from 1972, and yes, it's giant killer rabbits, but there's really no way to make rabbits look scary. Especially not when you use real rabbits on miniature sets and just slow down the film so they look like they're big and moving slow. The idea is that there's a large rabbit population, so they start injecting the rabbits with these hormones that they hope will make it so they're sterile and can't breed, but instead they end up mutating, becoming giant and man-eating rabbits. The movie basically goes from these real rabbits hopping around to then close-ups of people in rabbit costumes biting people's necks and stuff. This is one you would probably get a good laugh out of if you watched, but if you went into it thinking, ooh, that's going to be scary, like, no, it won't. Rabbits aren't scary. Ducks aren't scary. The movie was a bomb, currently sitting at 0% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Number 3 is The Giant Spider Invasion. This movie is from 1975. It is a whopping 14% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's about a meteor that crashes to Earth, and then the complications from that create giant spiders. This one made money. It made a good profit, but it's known for one of the worst effects ever, where the biggest of the giant spiders is basically a car with a spider costume on it. So there are scenes of people running through the fields with a giant spider chasing them, but it's a car driving after them with a spider suit on it. I think that's what sways me so much, is how bad the effects were, because it did make money, but it does have very negative reviews, so you be the judge. Number 4 is The Creeping Terror. This movie is from 1964. It is 23% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's about an alien monster that's basically a giant slug. So it moves very slowly, but somehow still seems to be able to catch people and eat them. Despite it being a slug or something like that, it looks more like people standing under a pile of carpets and just walking after people. Now, I will say the rumor is that they had a much better monster costume, but days before shooting began, it got stolen, so they had to basically go raid a furniture store and get carpets and make that into a monster. It is seen by many as one of the worst movies ever made. Not just giant monster movies, but just ever. I went into it with that knowledge, so I would imagine if you went into it not knowing what it was about, you'd be really disappointed. But if you went into it knowing it was supposed to be one of the worst movies ever, it's not that bad. And finally, number 5 on the list of top 5 worst giant monster movies is The Killer Shrews. A shrew is a small, mole-like mammal. Point your index finger. It's probably about as long as your finger. So this movie is about giant ones. The movie's from 1959, and all you need to know about the killer shrews is that they are played by dogs that are wearing what look like shrew-shaped ponchos. It's like if you had one of those, like a hoodie, and you pull the hood over and it's like an alien face or a monster face that makes it look like you're an alien or whatever. It's like they did that, but with dogs. The movie is about a group of researchers trapped by a hurricane on an island that is inhabited by these giant mutant bloodthirsty shrews. It's like of all the creatures to turn into killers, it's like they were looking in the dictionary for the most random, obscure animal. The movie is so bad and so dumb, but you may actually get a kick out of it. Especially as soon as you see the reveal of the shrews, you're gonna immediately... I knew right away, I'm like, wait a minute, it's like dogs wearing coats. So yeah, if you can watch any of these movies in the top 5 or the honorable mentions for free, do it. If you've got to pay even 1 cent, don't waste your time. But that's gonna wrap up the top 5. Now, coming up, we have a segment 20 years in the making, as I look back at a very brief but very impactful time in my life. Get ready for a lot of fun and foolish stories as I talk about living in Florida, briefly, 20 years ago this month. This segment has been an ordeal as far as patience goes. I have wanted to do this segment ever since the calendar turned to 2025, but I knew I had to wait until closer to the actual anniversary of when these events happened. Well, I didn't have to wait. I chose to wait. What we're going to get now is a little bit of a condensed look at my brief time living in southern Florida in 2005. And by brief, I mean a little over 2 months. And we pack a lot into those 2 months. So you remember earlier in the podcast, I mentioned there was something I was going to be dropping soon on the free tier on Patreon. I'm going to record a more full-length, freestanding podcast about my time in Florida, because I did had to shave some stuff off to make this a segment that would fit inside of a regular podcast. So if you get done with this segment and you want more of my time in Florida, more laughs and head shaking, head over to Patreon and become a free member, and you'll get to hear me talk about it. I don't know when. Within the next few weeks, we'll say. I moved to Florida in September 2005. This was a reaction to the ending of a serious relationship. The original plan was to move to New Orleans in the summer of 2005. I had apartments lined up to look at in New Orleans. I even had a potential job at an art gallery. Now, being that it's been 20 years, I can't remember the name of the art gallery, but I was so confident that I'd be living in New Orleans soon that I began sending feelers out to this art gallery as far as meeting them. I don't know what my job was going to be, maybe some kind of greeter at the front door. But that relationship ended, so thus my reason for moving to New Orleans ended. I wasn't going to just go there for the hell of it. And boy, was that good timing, I guess, if a relationship ending can have good timing. Because maybe 2 months, less than 2 months after I would have moved to New Orleans was when Hurricane Katrina hit. I often think about that, where my life would have been if I had ended up in New Orleans. But even though my plans for New Orleans had fallen apart, my mind was still set on moving off of Cape Cod, much like I had done 5 years earlier when I moved to Las Vegas. I felt like I was stagnating on Cape Cod, and I needed a big change. It wasn't something where I switched jobs or I changed my clothing style or hairstyle. I was in my 20s. It was time for bigger and better. So I thought the change was going to be going to New Orleans and continuing a serious relationship. My backup plan was Florida. I was lucky because I have a cousin, Tracy, and her then boyfriend. They lived in Delray Beach, which is just south of West Palm Beach on the east coast of Florida. The plan was going to be for me to actually move further south to Fort Lauderdale and live in an apartment where another cousin and her boyfriend were living. It was like deja vu for me, as I gave my notice at the same restaurant I had been working at when I moved to Vegas and gave my notice then. That was probably a big reason why I felt stagnant on Cape Cod, going right back into the same industry, the same exact job I had. But I packed up my entire life into my blue Saturn Ion, and right after Labor Day, I headed south from Cape Cod down I-95 toward Florida. It was 1,500 miles all by myself. My back seat was full. My passenger side seat was pretty full. My trunk was full. Now, the drive south, for the most part, was pretty standard. New York City was, as always, a pain with traffic. I went through or got close to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., I couldn't make it the full distance in one swoop, so I ended up staying overnight in Southern Virginia, which, boy, that was fun. Leaving my car loaded with my whole life out in the parking lot. I basically draped a blanket over stuff and just hoped that no one would notice in the dark that it was filled with everything. I was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. So much so that when I went to get gas from a gas station on some rural road, and I went to use the credit card slot, there was a black widow spider that had made a web around it. I had to go inside and pay with my credit card, and when I told them about the spider, they seemed to not care. I don't think they get too many visitors there. While driving through North Carolina, I came upon some road work. I wasn't paying that close of attention, and I had to end up slamming on my brakes, which ended up I owned and still own this soft green 8-pound medicine ball. And when I hit the brakes, that ball shot forward out of the back seat, hit my gear shift, and threw my car into park. Stupid ball almost gave me whiplash. One thing I remember on the drive down was basically never seeing a police officer anywhere. I got so brazen that I got my Saturn up to like 105 miles an hour, which is dangerous in a car that's built out of like fiberglass. All you need is a gust of wind and I would have been flown off the highway into the trees. Only when I crossed the state line into Florida did I realize how big the state was. I stopped in St. Augustine and I called my cousin Tracy to tell her, hey, I've crossed into Florida. And she just laughed and said, yeah, well, you've got another 4 hours of driving to get to where she was, and about another 5 hours of driving to get to Fort Lauderdale. So I stayed overnight again in St. Augustine, covered my back seat again. Looking back, I kicked myself that I didn't go to visit St. Augustine Lighthouse. I actually ended up with 2 chances to go and see it, but missed out both times. Then again, with no GPS back in 2005, I'd have just gotten lost. I remember I stopped in Delray Beach, and I stayed there, and it was almost like I didn't want to go down to Lauderdale, to the actual apartment I was supposed to live in. My cousin Tracy is like the older sister that I never had, so I felt very secure there with her. It was like the closest I could get to Cape Cod. So I hung out there, enjoyed myself. Tracy's house then was on the Intercoastal Canal, so she had a dock. Everyone around her had boats. I would sit out on the dock at night, listen to my iPod shuffle, and drink and enjoy myself. I was taking it easy. Sure, I was looking for a job, but it was almost like I had no plan and no sense of urgency. I was just in Florida because it was different. Once I got down to Fort Lauderdale, it was like being in the tropics. Palm trees everywhere. A flock of wild parakeets lived in the tree outside of my bedroom window. Every morning, it was like being in a frickin' pet store. These little green parakeets, squawking, I wanted to throw rocks at them. The only job interview that I went out for was this company that specialized in new baby photos. So you'd go to a new parent's house, take photos of the parents and the baby, and you would then pressure them into buying a package of these photos. Like when you do school photos for your kids. I forget the name of the company, but I drove to the office to meet the guy. It wasn't that far from my apartment in Lauderdale. I just remember the guy that I went with, he looked like Larry Fine from the Three Stooges. Bald, curly hair with a giant nose. We drove to one potential location in Miami. I remember going through Alligator Alley in the Everglades, seeing gators on the side of the road, and also people jogging in the same vicinity, and just being surprised that I didn't see someone get killed. This was the one and only time in my life I've ever been to Miami, and I just remember not feeling comfortable with the way this guy was pressuring a new mother into buying an expensive photo package. It is a reason why I am not the best salesperson, because I empathize too much with people when it comes to money issues. If a new mother says, I can't afford several $100s for these photos you're taking, and you say to them something like, oh, you could just buy less formula for your kid. I mean, God, how much of a scumbag do you have to be? So, needless to say, I did not get that job. Honestly, I think my moving to Florida was snake bit. It was a fallback plan from what I really wanted to do, which was move to New Orleans. I think that's why I wasn't heavy into the job search. More proof that it was snakebit came about a month into my time there when Hurricane Wilma, a Category 3 storm, struck central and southern Florida. Any other job interview I had on the slate was all gone. As the storm was getting closer, I left Lauderdale, I left that apartment, went up and stayed with Tracy in Delray Beach. One thing I remember, it's funny, one of the first things I thought of about my time in Florida was not far from where Tracy lived in Delray Beach, there's a place, Linton Boulevard, and there was a strip mall that had 4 fast food places in the same parking lot. To tell you how healthy I was, I would go in and snake my way through all 4, getting one meal basically from 4 places. KFC, Wendy's, Taco Bell, and Arby's. I got to drive the A1A highway like in Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby. Yes, I found it amusing. I also got to be in on the ground floor trying these new energy drinks called Celsius. You may have heard of them now, but they actually were founded in Delray Beach in 2005. I was there drinking them when they were in these glass bottles with the screw-on top. There were also lizards everywhere. Think of it as like when you see squirrels outside, just replace them with these 6 to 8 inch long lizards. That's how it was living down in Florida. Lizards and parakeets. So the hurricane came, knocked out power, caused a lot of damage. Luckily, Tracy's house wasn't damaged, although the wind knocked all of the grapefruits out of her grapefruit tree. They were in her pool. We had to go throw them in the intercoastal, just a bunch of grapefruits. The worst damage I saw, there was this luxury auto dealership that was a couple roads over. It had a fully glass front showcase, and basically all the glass broke and it pancaked all those cars. It was likely over $1 million worth of cars just crushed. We ended up having to drive nearly 100 miles north to find a gas station where we could get gas to fill Tracy's generator. That ended up being not a feasible option going forward because we didn't know when power would be back on. So Tracy had friends that lived in Orlando, and they had power, so they invited us to come and stay up there. Boy, that was another unique experience. I'll just start it up by saying one of Tracy's friends liked being naked a lot, and it was not good naked. This person was very nice, but she was no model, and I was not enjoying it. Sorry. But on the other hand, we were within walking distance of Universal Studios, and it was the week of Halloween, so I got dressed up as a geisha girl to try to win the $5,000 contest. I did not win, but I did scare one of the staff that was dressed as a crazy with a chainsaw. He thought I was a woman until I turned around and said, "What?" And I scared him. Once we got back to Delray and power was back on, it really hit me that I wasn't feeling life in Florida. I blew through all my savings just trying to get my bearings. I was in a bad place mentally over my recent breakup. I didn't want to fail and go back to Cape Cod like I had done in Vegas, but I also didn't want to fail in Florida and be left with no way back. It's like reading a choose-your-own-adventure book and keeping your finger on the back page when you make a choice so that you go, "Oh, wait, I never left that page so I can go back." During the second week of November, it was a tearing off the Band-Aid moment. I just said to Tracy I felt it wasn't working for me there and that I was going back to Cape Cod. She said, and rightfully so, that I hadn't given it a full chance. I've always been someone that's had trouble asking for help from others. I'd almost rather suffer than feel like I owe someone. What I mean is if I had remained in Florida, I likely would have needed to borrow money to make ends meet until I found a decent paying job. I hated that idea. The irony is that what lay ahead of me was driving 1,500 miles back to Cape Cod where I'd also have no money and no job. All I can say about my drive back to Cape Cod was that after staying overnight in North Carolina, I got pulled over for speeding on the highway and was told I needed to appear in court. I said I was moving back to Cape Cod. The cop didn't care. He said, "You either appear in court on," I think it was a Monday and it was a Friday. He said, "You either appear in court or you hire a lawyer to appear on your behalf," which is what I ended up having to do. I had to pay a lawyer to go to court for me to fight this speeding ticket in North Carolina. That sounds like a lot of words I just came up with, but it was a real situation. My time in Florida lasted a little more than 2 months. Was it a failure? Overall, yes, but with a caveat. If Hurricane Wilma hadn't hit, I think I would have had a better chance for success. It went from being a new chapter of my life to sort of a reality game show where we had to travel hours to get gas, dress up for costume contests. Do I regret it? Not at all. Even the money I paid for the lawyer to represent me on my speeding ticket was a life lesson. Interestingly, though, when I left Vegas, I've always had a desire to return there. Maybe not to live, but at least to visit. I've never had a desire to ever go back to Florida, which makes me wish my cousin Tracy lived somewhere else. To kind of put a bow on this, there was one major positive that came from my time in Florida, and it's still large in my life, and it includes what you are hearing right now, this podcast. While on my laptop in the apartment in Fort Lauderdale, I happened upon a screenplay writing contest and wrote something for it but didn't win. I was so happy with it that I turned it into my first short story I ended up calling 8 Hours. That short story started me down a different writing path, where poetry faded away and it was replaced by short stories, children's books, novels. I uploaded more than a dozen of those ebooks onto the brand new Amazon Kindle store between 2007 and 2010. So all of my writing, ebooks, blogs, 9, 10 published books, podcasts, YouTube videos, any of my film stuff that's going to be coming up, it all stems from that contest in Florida. And the story I wrote stemmed from the end of my relationship. So for as disappointed as I was that I bailed on Florida pretty quickly, I feel like all of my major accomplishments professionally got their start during that brief time when I called Florida home. And for that reason, I can never say that my time there was a failure. So that was a bit of a speed run through my 2+ months of living in Florida 20 years ago. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a more in-depth podcast on Patreon with more in-depth adventures from the hurricane, how I celebrated my birthday in Florida, and all that good stuff. But I liked sharing some laughs, some head-shaking moments, and almost like my origin story of all of this stuff that I'm doing to this day. It all started 20 years ago in Florida. But until next week, that's going to wrap up episode 212 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for making it to the end of my trip back with a lot of Gen X nostalgia. Next week, the nostalgia train keeps on rolling with episode 213. You can fall back into fitness as we look at some classic 1980s VHS home workout tapes. We're going to go back in the day and look at some forgotten 1970s cereals. The brand new top 5 is going to be the top 5 crushes from the 1980s, and we're going to do male and female. So all of that and more is coming up next week on episode 213 of the In My Footsteps podcast. If you enjoy my work, you can become a subscriber on Patreon for $5 a month. You get access to bonus podcast episodes, access to the Remastered Without a Map live streams, one of which is going up this week. You can join the free tier and you'll get access to the long-form Florida 20 Years Ago podcast. I do believe my notes for that podcast, it's like almost 5,000 words. Of course, you can go and buy me a coffee. You can spend as little as $1 to donate. You can find me all over social media, Instagram. I have a Facebook fan page. That's for the podcast. My personal page, I do not accept anyone if you're not an actual family member or a friend. So don't get offended if you friend request me on Facebook and you immediately get deleted. That's what my fan page is for. I'm also on Threads, Blue Sky, occasionally TikTok. I've got YouTube videos on my channel. Visit my homepage, ChristopherSetterland.com. Links to all 9 of my current books, with a 10th book debuting September 30th. In Their Footsteps, the people, places, and events of Cape Cod history. It's all good to go. So this one is one I've been talking about for a while. I just need to create the landing page so you can go there and see what it's all about and buy from there. Go into the podcast notes and find the link to the GoFundMe for the When Henry Met Henry short film, my directorial debut alongside Frank Durant. The fundraiser is going for another few weeks. We plan on shooting the film sometime in the late October. So if you're listening to this podcast after Halloween 2025, don't go looking to donate. Well, you can. You could just become a Patreon member instead. That'll be your donation. Wherever you're at, I hope you have the best day, the best week. Hopefully the weather's still good where you are. Fall starts this week. Soon the leaves will be changing. Soon it's October and spooky season, and I've got a lot of fun topics on the podcast for that. But until next week, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. Thank you all again for tuning in. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland. You already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.